Welcome, everyone, to Navigating the Unpredictable World of Labor and Employment Obligations for Federal Contractors. This presentation is brought to you by Quimbee. My name is Eric Leonard, and I look forward to spending the next 60 minutes with you surveying and analyzing the wide range of federal labor and employment obligations imposed on federal government contractors. This area is truly a living area of the law, as federal labor and employment obligations can be shaped by not only the FAR Council and other regulators, but also Congress and the priorities and/or agendas of the individual residing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as we will soon see. But perhaps further complicating this exercise is the realization that federal contractors only have to navigate the federal contractor-specific requirements, but also traditional labor and employment obligations that apply to virtually all, if not all, companies. Over the next 60 minutes, we will seek to sort out all these at times overlapping and intertwined obligations and suggest strategies for managing compliance risk associated with them. So let's get started. There are a number of sources from which labor and employment obligations for government contractors arise from. Let's assume you're an in-house counsel of a federal government contractor that may be new to the federal marketplace. Like any good in-house counsel, you've undertaken the process of developing a compliance program focused on the myriad of specific obligations imposed on federal government contractors. One critical component of such a program is ascertaining the scope and extent of labor and employment obligations specific to federal contractors. Unfortunately, there is no one-stop shopping destination that would list all these obligations. Instead, these obligations can originate from a wide variety of sources and change over time, further complicating this exercise. But let's delve a little bit deeper into these sources of federal government contracting labor and employment obligations. Federal statutes are probably a good place to start and a primary source of a number of the federal labor and employment obligations. We'll talk about a few of these examples today, including the Service Contract Act, the Davis-Bacon Act, and Title VII. But it's not just statutes from which these obligations derive. Executive orders can also impose obligations on federal contractors. And in fact, one of the broadest and arguably most important federal labor and employment obligation derives from an executive order, EO 11246. Since 1965, Executive Order 11246 prohibits U.S. government contractors from discriminating in hiring or employment decisions on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and requires them to engage in affirmative action. The U.S. Department of Labor Employment Standards Administration, Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP, enforces EO 11246. We'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about 11246. But it's not just EO 11246. Presidents have been using administrative orders, particularly more recently, to impose obligations that maybe had little to no chance of succeeding and passing through Congress. One example of this are the minimum wage executive orders for federal contractors. Starting in 2015, with the issuance of an executive order and followed up a few months ago with a new executive order, the executive branch has increased the federal minimum wage that contractors must pay on certain types of contracts, primarily services and construction. These minimum wage executive orders work in tandem with some of the labor standard statutes that we're going to talk about, including the Service Contract Act and Davis-Bacon Act. But as we will discuss in detail later, the scope of these obligations may be broader than they appear at first and require careful consideration, particularly for companies that use employees to perform a mix of federal and commercial work during their work week. Another executive order issued in 2016 and implemented starting in 2017 is the Paid Sick Leave Executive Order. Under this executive order, federal contractors must provide paid sick leave to their employees if those employees perform work under a contract subject to the rules. Again, primarily service contracts and construction contracts. This obligation again derived from an executive order and just adds to the pile of leave-related obligations a federal contractor must navigate.